Hi, I'm Harris Solomon. I'm a cultural anthropologist at Duke University, and in this module we'll learn about interviewing. So in the first lesson, we'll think together about how to develop an interview guide. We'll talk about what interviewing is, and also what it's not. We'll think about the components that make up an interview guide, and we'll also talk about piloting the interview guide. So what exactly is interviewing? You've probably seen interviews in your daily life. You've seen them on the news, you've seen them in sports, but interviews are also a really essential component of social research, and you'll learn how to do it. What's most important to know is that an interview, even though it is a conversation, is also a relationship that you forge between yourself and your respondent. It's not extractive. What that means is that the best interviews are a link between two people, and it's not about extracting knowledge so much as it is forging a relationship through a conversation. Also, in this light, it's important to know that when you interview someone, you're making a commitment to learn on their terms, not yours. You may have ideas about the questions that you're asking, but it's really important to remember that you're learning what someone else knows. And as a result, you can triangulate what you observe with what you wonder through questions in an interview. So interviews can also be informed by observation and supplemented. So there are many different types of interviews, and we'll talk about a few key ones. The first and most common kind of interview is the kind of interview that you have in a conversation. This is called an informal interview. The second kind is more formalized, but is unstructured. This is called an open-ended or unstructured interview. The third kind, the kind of interview that we'll talk about most today, is called a semi-structured interview. And the final type of interview is called a fully structured interview. I'll detail each of these in depth. So in addition to the different formats of interviews, it's important to know that interviews differ in their degrees of structure. The least structured types of interviews are informal or conversational interviews, and the most structured are called fully structured interviews. When you think about a research project, you want to ask yourself which types of interviews might be most amenable for the questions and problems that I'm investigating. The first type of interview is called an informal interview. Informal interviews are casual and conversational. They happen in everyday conversations. They're excellent for learning from your interlocutors about a phenomenon that's happening in real time. So you could observe an event together and ask someone what their thoughts are on it. Because they're so casual, they're usually not audio recorded and producing a transcript. They're really good for gathering broad ideas about a phenomenon. By contrast, giving an interview a little bit more structure might end up with an open-ended or unstructured interview. An open-ended interview is very broad in scope. It can ask someone about a particular event or experience, but it doesn't give you a lot of control over the responses. In an open-ended interview, it's very common that they take longer than other types of interviews because you're asking your respondent to speak at length. There are fewer questions from you and more speaking from your respondent. These types of interviews are excellent for things like life histories. Imagine that you're speaking with an elderly family member and asking them about where they were during a particular historical event, or what their childhood was like. You turn the tape recorder on, ask the question, and let them speak. That's an open-ended or unstructured interview. The next type of interview is called a semi-structured interview. We'll focus mostly on semi-structured interviews today. As the name implies, a semi-structured interview is somewhere between an unstructured and fully structured interview in terms of its degree of specificity. It is based on preset questions. These are questions that you script in advance. But even though it follows a specific order, it's flexible and adaptable. So you don't have to have your respondent answer every single question. Sometimes they may anticipate your questions and give you different kinds of answers. So a semi-structured interview has structure, but also allows for emergent ideas. It's flexible and improvisational, but it also can be consistent. At the other end of the spectrum of specificity of interviews is what's called a fully structured interview. You're probably really familiar with fully structured interviews in their most common form, which is a verbal survey. So think about a survey having a very strict set of questions. Every single question must be answered. It's relatively inflexible because everything is pre-scripted, and it's suitable for contexts in which a survey might be used, such as a particular kind of experience or an opinion or knowledge or attitudes or practices, but it doesn't allow for a lot of emergent ideas, it doesn't allow for conversation, and it doesn't allow for adaptability.